Money FM 89.3, the best of Saturday mornings. International News Review.
Good morning. Welcome back. The International News Review with Steve Okun, finally back after being gone for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. Unbelievable how much time off this guy takes. But hey, we're happy to have him in the studio just razzing him. Steve, welcome back. We're going to start with some China restricting U.S. film releases because of the tariffs. First of all, how the heck are you?
First, I miss one show. That's it. One show, which you both have recently missed, and I'm the one who's taking all the heat.
You have to, Steve, and I made fun of you last week because, as I said on air, you're a lawyer by training. You had the worst opening gambit ever. You said, I never take a week off. Glenn takes time off.
This was like 2 weeks ago.
Neil takes time off. Yeah. And we just said, Steve, you're off next week. That's the worst opening argument ever.
I live in the present.
Okay. Fair enough.
I live in the present.
All right, let's jump into this. Just hours after Trump imposed the 125% tariffs on Chinese products, China announced that it will further curb the number of films allowed to screen in the country.
U.S. films.
U.S. films. Why is this important, Steve?
It is critically important, and it's something that I actually talk quite a bit about in New York with a lot of investors and in private equity types, the people Neil hangs out with. And,
always.
And look, when we talk about U.S.-China, Donald Trump talks about one thing and one thing only, and that's trade in goods. And Donald Trump has this, at best, 1970s mentality, in that it only counts if you make something with your hands. If you bring metal together and you create something physical, that's what counts. That's all that matters when it comes to trade, and that's what he completely focuses on. And when it comes to U.S.-China, the U.S. has a massive deficit when it comes to trade in goods. And so all of the actions Donald Trump is taking against China are to reduce that deficit in trade in goods and to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. He misses something so critically important. The U.S. dominates when it comes to the services economy. It dominates when it comes to trade in services. So what do trade in services include? Basically anything you don't make. Travel, education, intellectual property, digital, entertainment, which we'll talk in a second. Those are all trade and services where the U.S. has a $32 billion surplus with China alone. So when Donald Trump goes after China and he cranks up those tariffs on goods at 245% or something like that now for certain goods, some are at 125%. China's retaliation is not on trade and goods. China's retaliation is on trade and services. And the first target they're going after is Hollywood. And they are going to hit the U.S. on services, and that is going to be a real impact on the U.S. It's starting in Hollywood, and it's going to go beyond that. And it's something where, all the people I'm speaking with, and certainly the financial services sector, the digital services sector, they're really worried that they're going to get brought into this trade war.
It's not an insignificant amount. I mean, the Minecraft movie, which has terrible reviews but is doing exceptionally well at the box office, it topped the Chinese box office last week, $15 million, which is around 10% of its global total. They still need that China market, Steve.
Hey, a movie that, frankly, I never even heard of, Godzilla v. King Kong, or Godzilla X King Kong, The New Empire. Maybe Max saw it. I have no idea, never heard of it. It made $132 million in China out of a $500 million global gross. And so when you you're talking about significant money for these movies. And Hollywood has planned on a massive box office out of China this year, including movies we have heard of, some of which I actually do want to see. Mission Impossible, The Final Reckoning, the new Superman, another version of Jurassic Park, which I won't watch, Avatar something or another. They're counting on China. And the studios are going to get hit hard by this. And so let's see what happens as a result of China retaliating against the U.S. They're not just going to retaliate on tariffs and trade in goods. They're going after trade and services.
But there's a key point here that might underline Donald Trump's hubris, which is there was this film last year, Singaporeans know it, apologies for the mispronunciation, it was called Ni Zha 2. It has become one of the biggest selling, if not most successful films in China of all time. time, it took $1.8 billion in China alone. This is a deliberate attempt by China to move away from Western movies and produce more of their own movies, which is a convoluted way of saying Hollywood needs China at this point a lot more than China needs Hollywood. Is this another example of American hubris?
I mean, I don't know if it's hubris as much as it's not recognizing that the U.S. is a powerhouse in the services sector, and that Donald Trump's trade wars ignore everything where the U.S. dominates and focus where the U.S. doesn't. Look, there is nothing wrong with putting tariffs on certain sectors in China for very deliberate reasons, being either one, China's engaging in unfair trade practices, and you level the playing field through tariffs, and that's because China is giving state subsidies to key 21st century sectors. By all means, tariff that because it is unfair trading practices. And Trump did it in his first term. Biden kept them and upped them, and Trump's upping them in his second term. That's one thing. You have a reason to do that. Other countries tariff China because they need to protect certain domestic sectors. Every country needs an auto sector because it's not just about selling cars and selling EVs that block in Glenn, right? The auto sector.
It was a BYD, by the way.
Great car.
And actually, I love BYDs. I think they're awesome cars. But
great
yes,
supply chain model.
Carry on.
But if China uses state subsidies for BYD, which it does, and then it dumps in a economic term, in a trade term, if it dumps those vehicles into countries, and those countries lose their auto sector, you need your auto sector for your defense sector, for your defense industry. So yes, tariff EVs to protect a certain sector. But when you go after the entire economy, which is what Donald Trump is doing, and not just the Chinese economy, the global economy, that is bad for you economically, and it also sets you up for retaliation. And the Chinese are retaliating against the United States. They're retaliating on trade and goods, and they're about to hit the U.S. on trade and services. Hollywood is the first. It's not going to be the last.
Well, let's talk about, since we're on that China trade, the fallout and the cancellation of Chinese freight ship bookings, right? Those bookings have plummeted. Obviously, there were many ships that were in the ocean on the way to the U.S. when the tariffs hit. They turned around, went back to China because they couldn't afford to pay the tariffs. We're already seeing Port of Los Angeles, Port of Long Beach, the port at Charleston, the number of freight containers drastically dropping, which is going to have, the experts say, a knock-on effect to many other elements or segments of this, of the trade supply line and businesses in the U.S.
In the U.S., in the world. It's why Singapore is now saying it may have a recession here. Now, as you said, I flew in from New York on Wednesday, and boy, are my arms tired.
Hey.
And I don't know if I'm just noticing this, if it's always that case, because the port of Singapore is so crowded. But it seems that there's even more ships here now, just sitting outside,
just waiting
with nothing to do and idling, and that just shows the slowdown in the global economy. And it means that we can have potentially a global recession. Singapore, even though it has got the minimal tariffs the United States has right now of 10%, so it's paying, what the penguins are paying, 10%, where other countries are paying more. But it's the tariffs on Singapore aren't what's going to hit the Singapore economy. It's the slowdown in global trade.
And what is the possible follow-on effect as the ports slow in the U.S. for the U.S., right? We've got crane operators. We got what does that chain look like in terms of the multimodal transportation in the U.S.? Because the U.S. doesn't just use ships, right? We use trucks and trains and all kinds of things.
It hits the entire U.S. economy. Goods become more expensive, so that's going to be inflationary. So if you're raising costs by increasing tariffs and you're reducing supply because you're increasing tariffs, well, then costs are going to go up. ups. You're going to have inflation throughout the United States, and we could talk about Mr. I think it was it Ian who put in the question about the Fed, because that would be an unbelievable disaster if Donald Trump goes after Chairman Powell. So we can talk about that in a moment. But no, it's going to cause massive inflation. It's why J.P. Morgan and others are saying there's a better than 50% chance the U.S. is going to go into recession. It's going to cost jobs, and so you're going to have increasing unemployment. I mean, it's just a nightmare scenario, and we're going to get into this term I think we've mentioned once before that we didn't talk about since Jimmy Carter's day of stagflation. You're going to have lowering economic output and rising costs at the same time. That is an awful situation. It's going to impact the U.S., but it's impacting the world.
But will it impact the MAGA movement? A lot of these guys are Trump voters. As Glenn says, it's going to affect container pickups. It's going to affect transport by trucks, by rail, for warehouses, for storage.
Longshoremen on the docks.
Yeah, exactly. You know. These are generally, they're unionized guys, but they're generally blue-collar guys, many of whom will be a part of the MAGA movement, certainly voted for Trump. Is it going to start to have any negative impact on his popularity with his base?
Well, Donald Trump won the election primarily on two things, and again, I think Harris lost more than Trump won, but either way, Trump's president, right? He ran on immigration and he ran on inflation, and he is obviously attacking immigration and completely changing the law in the United States on that. That may or may not be popular with the MAGA base. So maybe he is doing what he said he was going to do when it comes to immigration. But he also said he was going to lower inflation. What he's doing right now is extraordinarily inflationary on tariffs and on immigration, because you get rid of jobs, you increase the cost of wages. Now, his deflationary actions are the DOGE, right? Deregulation, get rid of rules, eliminate red tape, and that's going to increase business. That's going to increase investment. That's going to raise the economy, and that could be deflationary, as well as tax cuts, as well as his energy policy. So he's saying, I'm going to be inflationary on some things. Well, he doesn't say it, but his advisors would say, I'm going to be inflationary on some things, deflationary on others. Right now, if he can't be deflationary and he's totally inflationary, I do think that there's no question the Republicans will lose in the midterms. Will it turn the MAGA base on Trump himself? So far, it's been almost impossible to get that 40% or so of Americans who really identify MAGA to move off of him. But that other 10%, that can move away from him.
When does the China slowdown start to affect Singapore directly?
I mean, it already is, and I think this is one of the discussions I was in with a group of investors, and one person there, obviously this is we're all off the record, but one person said there, that they are invested in a company, and this company had about $2 billion in CapEx plan, capital expenditures planned for 2025, and they've cut it down to $200 million. Because there's so much uncertainty, so much volatility right now. You can't invest because you don't know where the world's going to be a year from now. And this capital expenditure, it takes you time, obviously, to build a factory, to build a warehouse, to buy new planes, to buy new ships, whatever it may be. You're getting the slowdown now because money isn't being spent. And the money that's not being spent, then that's less jobs, it's less tax revenue. So you're seeing it already. Some people are saying, oh, well, it's going to take months or longer before the tariffs hit and we see rising prices because everybody saw this coming. It did not take a rocket scientist to understand Donald Trump.
Was predicted from the beginning.
He says tariffs his favorite word in the dictionary, right? So you know what he's going to do. But, some goods it may take a couple months to have that impact, but it's going to be felt now. And it's already being felt in certain sectors of the economy, certainly on the Canadian-American border. It's being felt. It's being felt in the travel industry with people not going to the United States. That could only slow down reading all of the nightmare stories you're seeing about how foreigners are being treated at immigration lines.
At the borders,
It's already happening, but it can get a lot worse.
Let's talk. There is apparently a deal on Ukraine minerals between Ukraine and the U.S. Trump is saying, however, he's going to pass on Ukraine peace talks if no progress is made soon. So a couple of different things happening here, talking about Crimea and whatever, and Marco Rubio is getting involved, the Secretary of State. It's a little bit confusing when it comes to Ukraine right now, but where are we at as far as you can see?
Well, Secretary Rubio said, look, we've spent 87 days on this. Enough's enough. Why should we spend any more time than 87 days?
Trump said he was in the campaign, he was going to solve it in a day.
24 hours.
Yeah, 24 hours.
Ukrainians have been dealing with it for 3 years, but
right?
never mind. Yes.
87 days, I guess that's the deadline. And we don't know. I mean,
a shorter amount of time than it takes to sell TikTok, apparently.
And the problem is, so if the U.S. says enough's enough, we're done, this isn't possible. Now, does that mean that the U.S. is going to pull out of these peace talks, but continue to support Ukraine with weapons and money and intelligence? Or does it mean the U.S. pulls out completely?
Yeah.
That is a real fear that certainly the Ukrainians have, that it's the latter.
Sure. Yeah.
And President Zelensky has talked about Witkoff, who's the property developer who is now the negotiator for all things for Donald Trump. And Zelensky has said that Witkoff is consciously or unconsciously taking on the Russian narratives when it comes to these peace talks. And that, for example, Witkoff is saying, oh, well, we have these occupied territories in eastern Ukraine have to be formalized as part of the peace deal, that they would go to the Russians. And Zelensky's like, we never said that. Why are you taking on Russian side in that any peace deal has to include land from Ukraine to Russia? So there's real serious concern in Ukraine over what Witkoff is doing, real serious concern with what Rubio just said in that 87 days and that's not enough. We're out of here. And Trump has said recently he didn't blame Zelensky for the war, but he was not, quote unquote, not a big fan of Zelensky.
And never once blamed Putin. But is this another example of President Trump? He's bored. He's bored with Ukraine. He wants to move on to another episode of his reality TV-style presidency.
Well, it's either that or he favors Russia, which is, I think, worse. And that he wants to, he is moving the world. I think we've talked about this, where the world is headed back to the era of Yalta, where we have spheres of influence, and that of now the three great powers. Then there were two, of course, the Soviets and the Americans. Now you would say there's three powers: Russia, China, and the United States. And Russia gets its sphere of influence, and it does what it does without the U.S. or China interfering, and the U.S. gets to do what it does in its sphere of influence, and China gets to do what it does in its sphere of influence without interference from Russia and the U.S. If that's the question, are we headed? So it's not that Trump's bored. Is this part of what he sees as where the world should be headed from a geopolitical perspective, that we go back to this, Cold War era spheres of influence? And that is a very different world than the three of us have grown up in since we left, I would guess, elementary school or junior high school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Let's close off with this idea of the U.S. Foreign Service Schedule F is what it's called, has been or is going to be changed, and it relates to Foreign Service officers. Take us through what the Schedule F is and what the implications are, the Trump changes.
Well, this gets back to what Donald Trump and MAGA in America First believe, is that there is this quote unquote deep state within the United States government they're all liberals, they're all globalists, and that what these career civil servants should do is be loyal to the president, not to have their own agenda. Now, I completely disagree that there is this quote-unquote deep state. I mean, I have, in government, it was very clear to me when I was in government and I was a political appointee that the career civil servants, the senior executive service officers, they were dedicated and loyal to the Constitution. And that if the president and the administration wanted to act, they acted, whether it was Bush or Clinton or Reagan or Carter or Obama or whoever it would be. Donald Trump and MAGA in America First have a very different view, and they say that those career officials are disloyal to the president, and he wants to change the rules that have basically been in effect since the 1880s, which have said we need to have career bureaucrats who have protection from the politicians, who will do what is right, who will do what is legal, who will carry out legal orders, whoever tells them to do so, but that they are isolated from political influence. Donald Trump says we're eliminating that quote-unquote deep state.
Can he do that?
Yes, he can. And what the way he's doing it is he's going to reclassify the job descriptions. So I was one of a political appointee, and that's when you kind of call the Clinton administration. There were roughly 4,000 of us, and that 4,000 number stays consistent for now. It's 4,000 political appointees. Everybody else is career, and they have protections, and they can't be fired without cause, and they can't be fired because they didn't carry out a political order that was unconstitutional, et cetera. He's upping that number from 4,000 to 50,000 throughout the government. And so now, instead of having people who are like your deputy chief of missions at embassies or deputy assistant secretaries or deputy general counsels, those senior people who are true professionals in whatever area they are in. They're experienced diplomats, they're experienced regulators, they're experienced scientists, whatever it might be. He's changing them and taking them into this new schedule called Schedule Policy/Career, as opposed to being in the senior executive service, the senior foreign service. He's going to make them all at-will employees, and he will fire them if he wants to for any reason
if
whatsoever.
They don't pass the litmus test or whatever.
Or they don't do what he says, even though it's unconstitutional. He doesn't think that they're being effective because they can't do what he wants to do. And like one example is, I want to take over Greenland. And the Foreign Service officer said, Denmark says you can't do that. Okay, you're fired. I mean, it could be for any reason whatsoever. And so it is really going to have a massive exodus of all of these people who we have worked with for our lives, me inside government and outside Glenn, who you've seen here at the embassy over your years here. They could all be gone.
But it sounds farcical, Steve. It sounds utterly farcical to Singaporean listeners. American prides itself on this checks and balances model, different branches of government, one checks the other, and all he has to do is reclassify them. That's it. And he can do this without any legal ramifications whatsoever from the other branches. Well, it's that simple.
I mean, in a way, it is. Now, Congress could overrule him, but this is this is the executive branch operating within the executive branch. Now, Congress could say, no, you can't do that. That's illegal. Donald Trump tried this at the very end of his first term, issued an executive order creating this new schedule. Joe Biden immediately rescinded that executive order when he came into office. Now, less than 100 days into his second term, Donald Trump comes out with that same schedule again, and this is going to have an impact that most people do not recognize. It's going to be impacting here in Singapore and who could potentially be at the embassy. It'll impact other countries, but it's going to impact regulations. It's going to impact science. It's going to impact the environment. It's going to impact everybody, because we as a country have said we need to have the best and the brightest being in our executive service. Who are there for both Democrats and Republicans to use, and he blowing up that system.
I have to say, in 21 years of being in Singapore and knowing many of the embassy folks, the career foreign service people, and knowing some of them in Hong Kong and Tokyo as well when I lived there, these people, they are the most professional. I mean, they are literally the best of America, because they are oftentimes not only put in embassies and missions that are in very difficult circumstances, Iraq or Afghanistan, etc. But they faithfully execute the whatever is put to them by the president at the time. They don't always necessarily agree politically with the president who's in power, Republican, Democrat, whatever, but they do their job and they do it well.
I'll tell you,
all of them.
I was relatively new in my role at DOT, and I was sitting down and we were going over a rule. Can't remember what the rule was, but we were going over a rule that we wanted to come out, and a couple of the very senior career people were saying, "Well, we don't like this rule. Why?" And, for policy reasons. Yep. And then I came out and said, well, look, this, we really think we need to do this. And then the deputy general counsel, who's the career official, she looks at the guys who are like literally double my age and says, well, you heard the Politico, we're doing this. And I'm going, wait a second, you guys are smarter than I am. She goes, no, this is what you said. And I'm like, well, I know it's what I said. But that's what they did. They executed what the administration wants to do. And we're going to lose all of them. And it is going to be extremely harmful.
All right, let's finish on an upbeat note. Tell our listeners why Kieran Culkin is the world's greatest actor.
So I got so lucky to see Kieran Culkin and Bob Odenkirk and Bill Burr and Glenn Ross in New York. And I'm telling you, he's everything you wanted him to be, but the energy and the passion comes out. And there's even one scene in Glenn Ross, his back is to the audience, and he's just pointing with his fingers. And he's acting without his face, without facial expressions, without talking, and you know exactly what he's doing and what he means and what the emotion he's conveying in with those gestures. And I'm like, that is an actor.
Wow. There you go.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.